Okay. I'll touch base with you. That's at 1.
Okay, thank you all for taking some time out of your very busy days to come here. I see a few new people. How many people have never been here before? Anybody else? I guess you're the only one.
Special one.
Well, welcome, and welcome back to everybody else. As you can tell, changing the way you eat takes some practice and some learning, okay, over a period of time. It doesn't happen overnight. This is what I think the 8th session we've had now, and we've gone over quite a bit of stuff. I'll repeat a little bit of the material, and I'll go over the kind of basics right at the beginning so you'll understand. But as I've said before, I'm not only expecting you to learn what we're talking about today, but I'm also expecting you to teach other people. Because the only way we're going to have some diet sensibility in this country and around the world is if people such as yourself learn about this, practice it, and then teach other people. Because I'm sorry, but the professional world and the commercial world is doing a terrible job of helping people achieve a healthy weight and maintain that. They simply are not reading what's been published over the last 10 years, understanding that and interpreting it to people, okay? So you're getting kind of the cutting edge of where changes in dietary practices need to go, but it's going to happen one person at a time. Fortunately, today, we have the internet. This revolution, what Anders Einsfeldt in Sweden calls the diet revolution around the world, it's happening all over the world, would not have happened without the internet. Because 20 years ago, think about it, if you wanted to find out information about what to eat, where would you go? Pardon me? Maybe the library, there'd be some old book that's been there for 15 years, and completely out of date and whatever, yeah. We wouldn't get much, though, and you get kind of popularized kinds of things, you know. But where else could you go? Maybe, pardon? A doctor. And what would the doctor tell you? Things that he learned 20 years before. Okay. So the information sources were very slim. And I mean, how long do you get to talk to your doctor? 3-4 minutes? Come on. You know. The internet gives everyone the capacity to do their own research and to look at the latest material and to find information and educate themselves, okay, in the process. And that's exactly what's happening. The fact that cauliflower ran short in the stores this winter was due to the fact that people such as yourselves understand that cauliflower is a much better vegetable to eat than potatoes, rice, and pasta, okay? And that's happened in a lot of places. Sweden, for instance, now has, well, this is maybe 2 or 3 years ago, 23% of its population is on a low-carb diet. 23%, almost a quarter, okay? And they are the first Western nation to show a leveling off of the obesity crisis, where everywhere else in the world, including the United States, which the report I just got yesterday from the CDC, we're still at it. Our obesity rates continue to climb. They've been doing that for the last 30 years, okay? There's no end to it until people wake up, learn something about what to eat, and begin changing, not how much they eat so much as what they eat. And then when they do, as in Sweden, you begin to see weight starts to come down. And if we can simply achieve the same kind of diet that we had in this country 50 years ago, okay, with the proportionate amount of fat and carbohydrate that we were eating then, we'd all be much healthier, okay? What's happened over the last 40 years is a complete tragedy, and it has a lot to do with bad research, poor teaching, and commercial interests, okay? And I could go on about that, but you're getting little bits and pieces of that. So my particular concern is a public health concern. What's happening to people all over this community, all over the country, all over the world, with the kinds of food that people are eating, and tragically, informed that that's what they should be eating. And that's what's really tragic about this, okay? Lots of times people will eat things they know they shouldn't eat, but when they're eating things they think they should be eating, and they're gaining weight, and they don't know why, there's something very wrong, okay? So, let me just ask for a show of hands. Did anybody in the last 8 weeks lost a pound? Wow. 11. Anybody want to shout out anyone?
14.
14. 6.
13 and a half.
13 and a half.
9.
12.
12.
6.
5. 6. Okay? Don't listen to me. Listen to your bodies. If it's working, your body will tell you. Okay. All right, we're going to go through very quickly through some of the basics here just so everybody understands this. I'm sorry to be repetitious with everyone else. As I always say, I'm not a physician. If you're taking medication, please consult your doctor. Okay? Even if I were a physician, I'd still tell you, please consult your doctor. Okay? That we've been told, as I just said, the wrong information. We've been told to reduce fats in our diet, and that was based on a simplistic notion that because fat is calorie dense, there's twice as many calories in the same quantity of fat as there is in carbohydrate. So obviously, if you want to cut calories, then cut fat because you get twice as many calories cut. Unfortunately, what we know is that when you cut calories from your diet in any form, what happens? You get hungry, okay? Duh! And no one thought of that, okay? And meanwhile, people have been trying to cut calories, and when you cut calories, guess who wins? Your body, okay? Your body says, I'm hungry, I'm gonna eat. Doesn't matter, all right? So what you have to do is understand that your body is a hormonal, we're not a scale where, you know, weight in equals weight out, you know, that's the calorie notion. We are hormonally balanced, and our bodies regulate our weight through a series of hormones, primarily insulin. And we'll talk about that quite a bit later today. Because once we understand how insulin works, and that insulin's job is to take carbohydrates only and park them in our cells as fat, okay? Those carbohydrates in the form of glucose in our bloodstream are toxic to us. We'll talk some more about how and why. The body cannot excrete those calories, okay? The only thing it can do is one, to use it for heat or energy, okay, muscle energy. And quite frankly, most of us, by the time we're at about 1,600 calories, we've taken care of our needs for heat and energy. Everything above that gets stored as fat, okay? So we're constantly adding calories to our body, and our body's saying, get it out of the bloodstream, put it in the cells, and that's where it ends up, here, everywhere else, right? Okay, particularly here. That's the one that we're most concerned about is visceral fat. So the idea of cutting fat makes no biologic sense, okay? Especially then when we've taken fat out of foods and replaced it with sugar. You take fat out of food, it tastes terrible. Try it sometime, okay? The only thing the manufacturers could do to have a low-fat product was to add sugar. And take a look. Have you read the labels on yogurt? It's scary, absolutely scary what you're getting in those things. And people are just gobbling it up saying, this is good for me, it's low fat, you know, and down it goes and out it comes. When we eat fat, which doesn't stimulate insulin anywhere nearly as much as carbohydrates do, there's a little bit, but hardly anything, we can burn the fats, and actually it stimulates our body to burn the fat that we have on our body. The paradox of low carbohydrate, high fat diets, LCHF, okay? The paradox is the more fat you eat, the more fat you burn, okay? As strange as it sounds, okay? And in fact, I told you last week, Mark Hyman's just out with his latest book, Eat Fat, Get Thin, okay? I mean, that sums it up, all right? And I know lots of people, hi Amanda, I know lots of people who cut their carbs, but don't add the fat, and then they get hungry, and what do? You know, back it goes, okay? So you
And
got
I'll
to
just
do both.
add, when hi, I'm Amanda, sorry.
And let me adjust the camera, or can you move over here? Because if you're over there, we can't hear you. Come on over.
Sorry, babies and husbands are unpredictable, so. What?
I said you can stand here. Speak
So
loud in here for our television audience.
when I'm a dietitian and a diabetes educator for Southcoast hospitals, and I work with the diabetes management program. And I also recommend lowering carbohydrates and increasing fat to all of my patients, because if you have diabetes, you're carb intolerant. And so I always say, if you are hungry and if you're craving, you need more fat. And that is one of the biggest struggles that my patients have, is adding more fat, but it is super important. And that's what I spend most of my time working on. A lot of people understand how to cut carbs, but adding the fat in is key, super key.
It is. And that's why some of the
Hunger and
recipes.
cravings are your the ways to know if you need more fat.
Right. And there's lots of recipes over there for high-fat items, fat bombs and all kinds of things, okay? So you've got to increase the fats as you get the carbs out. It's the carbs that'll lead to weight gain, and not only lead to weight gain, but a disease that I didn't know much about 10 years ago. I didn't think I needed to know anything about it. I thought, oh, a few people get diabetes. Okay, big deal, it's not me. I'm eating a low-fat diet, it's not going to happen, okay? And yes, I have some relatives who were diabetic, but that's them, that's them. I'm healthy, you know, no problem. Blood sugars are normal, okay? In my mid-50s or so, okay? Cruise through life, it's fine. Sound like a familiar story? There you go. And then, what happened? I go to the doctor, I get my A1C. Anybody know what an A1C is? Okay, it's a blood test, and it tells you what's called the glycated red blood cells. Your red blood cells are replaced about every 3 months in your body. Okay, they die and they're excreted. Okay, screened out through your kidney, I believe. I'm not sure exactly where they're screened, liver or kidney, but
Yeah.
they're removed. Okay, but those cells also give a history of how much exposure they've had to sugar or glucose in your blood. So they're a good indicator of how much sugar, glucose, was circulating in your bloodstream over the previous 3 months. So it's a good indicator, much better than just doing a finger prick and checking your glucose level at this minute. This will look over 3 months, okay? And it evens out the highs and lows and things of that sort. So my level was 6.3. Anybody know what that means? High, right. Right on the border of diabetes. If it were 6.5, I'd walk out of my doctor's office saying, you have diabetes. And then what would happen? What's the first thing my doctor would have done if I had diabetes? Give me medication, absolutely. Because what do doctors know how to do? Give medication. Do doctors know anything about food or diet?
No.
For the most part, no. Okay? Most of them get about 2 weeks in medical school, and that's 20 years ago. Okay? So they do the one thing they know how to do, write you a script. I probably would have been on metformin, glucophage, any one of a number, you know. That would help to get the blood sugar down. Well, true, some medications do downregulate sugar in your bloodstream. But if I make no change in my diet, then I come back year after year after year, and what's happening to my blood sugar? It's going up, okay? Going up and up and up. More and more meds, going up and up and up, more and more meds. Why? Because most doctors assume that diabetes is a chronic, progressive illness, and there's nothing you can do, okay? Resign yourself to your fate. You're going to die of diabetes, okay? And in fact, many people do. They don't die of the diabetes directly. What do they die of? Complications and things like, number one, heart disease. Okay? Half the heart attacks in America are with people who have diabetes. Okay? Nobody thinks about that. What else might you get as you get chronically diabetic? Circulation problems, okay? All kinds of circulation problems. I should look at my slides here. And we're talking about type 2 diabetes, just so you understand. Type 1 used to be called juvenile diabetes, and now it's an early onset diabetes, but that's a very different disease altogether. Type 1 is where your body, for some unknown reason, attacks the beta cells in your pancreas that create insulin and kill them. And now you're without any insulin. If you eat something with sugar, and it's almost anything, and your body has no insulin, what happens? All the worst things that happen with diabetes immediately. It's very dangerous to not have any insulin, okay? So what do you give a type 1 diabetic? Insulin, okay? Which works fine, okay? And anyone who has type 1 is going to be on insulin essentially for the rest of their lives, or at least until we find a cure. And there's some evidence that we may get there at some point, getting those beta cells to recover and regenerate. But that's for science and probably the next 10 years. But type 2 diabetes happens to anyone who has a propensity for it. I have the, here we go. Here are the primary risk factors for diabetes. Let's see, can you do anything about being older? No. We wish. I'm sorry, but that one, you can't fight it. It's going to happen, okay, day after day. How about overweight? Can you do something about that?
Yes.
Sure. Okay, that's why you're here today. Okay, especially weight in the central core. How about physical activity? Can you do something about that? Absolutely. If you were in the gym this morning, you were doing something about that. It's important. Okay. Having high blood pressure or abnormal cholesterol, and that's a risk factor, but I don't know that there's any causal link other than those two are also metabolic disorders.
They're caused by the same thing.
Caused by the same thing, right. There are other symptoms of the same problem.
Exactly.
Right, high cholesterol and high blood pressure. Those three are high blood sugar, high blood pressure, and high cholesterol are grouped together and called metabolic syndrome. Okay, so people often have one, two, or maybe all three of those things all together. Okay?
And I'd just like to clarify about high cholesterol.
Stand up, please.
A lot of people talk about high cholesterol, and that means that your total cholesterol is over 200. But it's really more dyslipidemia, the disproportionate amount of lipids in your body. Because it's not just your total cholesterol that we should look at, it's also your good cholesterol, your bad cholesterol, and the triglycerides. The HDL, H for healthy, LDL, L for lousy, and the triglycerides. And a lot of people could have a total cholesterol under 200, and yet their HDL is in the toilet. And if that's the case, then you're still at risk for heart disease because the ratio is off. Or you could have a total cholesterol over 200, but you have amazingly high good cholesterol. There's nothing to worry about there. So it's not just looking at the total number anymore, and it's not just looking at the bad cholesterol anymore, because that's also kind of a total number. It doesn't separate out the different.
We're going to talk about the LDL in a minute.
Okay,
Yeah.
so I call it dyslipidemia because it's more than just high cholesterol. But the causes of the diabetes, the high blood pressure, and the high cholesterol are all grouped in, caused by the same thing.
Right.
So you fix one, you fix them all.
Other factors, family history, okay. Certain racial or ethnic groups, they're listed there, tend to have higher, and that's interesting, you know, nobody's really shown why that is, and a lot of people would posit that that's because people are eating Western diets. And then gestational diabetes, which essentially is getting diabetes when you're pregnant. It's really fundamentally no different than the diabetes later, but it tells you if you have gestational diabetes, that's women only, by the way, you're much more likely to develop diabetes later on as an adult. Okay? And I don't know if you want to say anything about polycystic ovary syndrome. I don't know much about it, but it's one of the risk factors.
Polycystic ovary syndrome is another disease that is linked with insulin resistance. So if you have that, it's just another sign that you are insulin resistant. And so that leads to type 2 diabetes later on.
Right. And I'm glad you said insulin resistance, because we often think about diabetes as high blood sugar, but long before high blood sugar develops as a symptom, what begins to happen in your body is your cells become resistant to insulin. Okay, that's called insulin resistance, and we'll talk a little bit about what you can do about that. But the fact of the matter is there are people who may have insulin resistance for 10 years or more before their blood sugar goes up. Chances are pretty good that if I had measured my insulin resistance when I was 45, it would have predicted my diabetes, my high blood sugar, when I was 55. But because everything else seemed fine, I never thought to ever ask for that. But if you're curious, I know some of you mentioned you're not diabetic, but you might want to, the next time you have a blood test, ask for insulin resistance, fasting insulin test, okay? And you may be in the normal range, but if you're not, even though your blood sugar may not be up, it's a precursor, okay? Because in fact, though we're often told that diabetes is a disease of too high blood sugar, it's really a disease of insulin resistance, which then leads to the symptom of high blood sugar. Okay? And some of the critics now say that we're treating the wrong thing. It's like having an infection, developing a high fever, you treat it with aspirin and you say, well, we've treated the infection. No, you haven't. You haven't done a thing about the infection. You just treated the symptom. Okay? So in the same way, with insulin resistance, you really need to treat the insulin resistance, and we'll talk about how to do that. So typically, these are the things you can do to treat diabetes or manage it. Lose weight, okay, you hear that all the time, and certainly wouldn't argue with that. Or have gastric surgery. Why do people have gastric bypasses and lap bending and all kinds of things done to their stomachs? What does it do? Yeah.
Less appetite.
There you go. Well, right. Their appetite may stay somewhat the same, but their capacity to retain food, to hold food without regurgitating, goes way down. So suddenly, after gastric surgery, you simply cannot eat very much. Well, what does that do to your carbohydrate intake?
Less.
Goes way down. Okay, hello. So if some of you here may have already had surgery, right? That's a typical kind of thing. It's going on more and more. Southcoast Hospital does it, and for people who just can't seem to find any other thing to do, nobody really recommends the kind of changes in diet we're talking about. So they have the gastric surgery. They end up reversing their diabetes, often within a few days after the surgery, long before they've lost any large amount of weight. It's very interesting. And I was scratching my head saying, why do people who have gastric bypasses lose their diabetes within a few days? What's going on? Well, you have to understand that diabetes is due to insulin resistance. Insulin resistance, as we'll see, is backing off on the demand for insulin. Well, when you eat a couple tablespoons full of food, you're backing way off on your demand for insulin, okay? So it doesn't take long for your body to go back to the way it was prior to the surgery, long before, when you didn't have diabetes, okay? You have to give your pancreas a rest, is another way of thinking of it. So you can also become more physically active. Smoking is related. If you're smoking, you're more likely to become diabetic. Stress is sometimes related to diabetes. And then what most people are doing is managing the symptoms of diabetes with medication. Metformin, diabetes, Bandia, you've got the whole list here, okay? And it grows every year. And then you're told, eat the right foods. But what foods are you told to eat?
Can I just jump up for one
Sure.
second? Just about the medications. A lot of people worry about when they go on, when they develop diabetes. They worry about the medication that they need to go on. And a lot of people are very fearful of taking insulin because they're like, oh, I'm going to be on insulin for the rest of my life. If that happens, it happens. It's a tool in order to control the blood sugars. Obviously, lifestyle changes that we're going to talk about today are going to make a huge impact. But there's a lot of newer meds that you may have seen commercials for, honestly. There's a lot of smarter meds out there that we're starting to use before we start using insulin, which is a smart idea because it works more towards that insulin, like resolving the insulin resistance and bringing the blood sugars down without adding more insulin into the bloodstream, which can, in some cases, aggravate the insulin resistance. So there's a lot of different types of medications out there, and they all do different things in the body, and they can be very useful, helpful, but insulin is not something that should be feared. It is something that, you know, some people develop really, really, really high blood sugars acutely. Their A1C may not be 6.4, they may be 15. And by using insulin in the short term, you can really reduce the blood sugars back to normal, and the body can function a little better again, and you may be able to get off the insulin. So it's not always long term. There's different ways to use it, there's different medications. But lifestyle and reducing the need for insulin in the bloodstream by cutting back on the carbs really makes the biggest impact.
Right. And fundamentally, if you want to get rid of the symptoms, you need to find a way to get rid of the glucose, because that's what stimulates the insulin. Having more insulin on board creates insulin resistance. So the less glucose you can consume, the better off you are. And some people may say, well, don't you need glucose? If you know anything about anatomy, you know that the brain depends on glucose. So if you drop your glucose level, what's going to happen to your brain? Well, guess what? Your body's well equipped. It will make its own glucose, sufficient to what the brain needs, okay? Are there people who live essentially without any glucose in their diet? Absolutely. Okay, and we've mentioned in the past the Inuit, the Eskimos, if you will, people in the northern hemisphere, who live for centuries on fish, blubber, meat, etc., okay? Can you grow a vegetable above the Arctic Circle? They have hot houses up there? No. Okay. These are whole civilizations that live quite successfully without carbohydrates. Okay. The Maasai in Africa largely live on milk and blood and animal products from the cattle that they raise. They don't garden. They don't raise grains, okay? So their diet is 65, 75% fat. And they have lived, again, for centuries with very low cholesterol rates, no diabetes, etc. Okay? Also, their teeth are great. And there are at least two other civilizations that we know of that have lived on high-fat diets. A lot of people in the paleo movement, has anybody heard of paleo eating? Okay. Paleo is like trying to eat the way we ate 10,000 years or more ago. Okay, before the invention of agriculture, when we were hunting and gathering. Okay, it's an interesting concept. I think there's a lot of discussion about whether it makes sense or not. But ultimately, the idea is that our bodies adapted over 2 million years of evolution to eat certain foods. In the last 4,000 years, we've changed that radically. Ever since we started planting grains, okay, and now in the last 200 years have begun manufacturing our food, we have radically changed what we eat. What we put in our bodies today is nothing like what for 99.9% of the human existence ate, okay? So if you want to know about strange diets, the one we're eating in America today is very strange, okay? And yet we like to think of it as healthy, okay? You're better off slaying an animal and cooking the innards of that animal and eating that than you are anything you'd find in a grocery store today. Yep.
Can diabetes be reversed?
Well, that's an interesting question. If you think about diabetes as essentially carbohydrate insensitivity or heightened sensitivity to carbohydrates, then you have to say, if it's reversed, does that mean that goes away? If my diabetes went away, okay, altogether, it would mean I could sit down and have a nice big pizza and my blood sugar wouldn't hit 200. But it will. If I eat the pizza the way you normally buy a pizza, which is plenty of grain and, bread, okay? So my diabetes isn't going to go away. But the symptoms and the insulin resistance that I had has gone away. My A1C now is 5.3. That's normal, okay? And that's not with any medication. That's simply by changing the foods that I eat consistently. And it took us several years. Gradually comes down and down and down and down. As my body begins to adjust to the fact that I'm not putting a demand for insulin on it all the time. By reducing the carbohydrates in my diet, I've now balanced what I eat with with the amount of glucose I can handle. Okay? And for me, that's about somewhere in the neighborhood of 20, 30 grams of carbohydrates a day. For somebody else, it might be 50, 60, 80, maybe even 100. Okay? You will not know, if you want to bring your blood sugar down, what that level is until you experiment. Okay? And it's not hard. It just means cutting carbs until you reach a point where now your blood sugar is normal. Okay? And if you're on a diabetes medication, in particular insulin, you need to do that in conjunction with your practitioner, either your doctor or your dietitian, because as you bring the amount of carbohydrates down in your bloodstream and then add insulin, what can happen? You put too much insulin in somebody? You've been there. How do you feel if you got too much insulin on board and your blood sugar drops to 50 or 40?
Donald.
Oh, you can pass out.
Yeah, pass out.
Oh,
Yeah, it's not a good thing.
No, no.
Okay, you can under extreme circumstances, you can die from it. Okay, and that's why if you have diabetes and you're feeling that way, one thing you do is put carbs in your system.
Right.
Okay, but typically that happens when people are taking amounts of insulin that are relatively high to manage the normal American diet. 300 carbs a day. The stuff that we're all told we're supposed to eat. You want to say some more about that?
Yeah, I was just going to say, if you're taking medication, no matter if it's insulin or some other diabetes medication, if you are going to start cutting your carbs, you need to be testing your blood sugar. You need to be testing it multiple times during the day in order to see what the effect of the diet change is making. And that way you can either adjust the oral medication or the insulin that you're taking. I've worked with a lot of people who are cutting back on their carbohydrates, and they do need to titrate down on their insulin, whether it's a long-acting or something that they take with meals, or any of their other oral medications. We will gradually cut back on them, but knowing what your blood sugars are throughout the day makes a huge difference, because otherwise you're flying blind and you won't know if you're approaching 50 or if you're still flying high at 200. You need to kind of have that insight to what your body's doing. So when you're making this dietary change, it's very, very important. And that's one thing that a lot of people will skip out on and be like, I think my blood sugar is about 150. It's important to know.
We think we know what our blood sugar is. You can't. Only a glucometer will tell you what your blood sugar is. You can feel all kinds of ways, but it doesn't necessarily mean anything.
Right.
Yeah. Okay, so those are all the things you can do to treat or manage diabetes. Here's what the NIH, I got this up the NIH website just a couple days ago. There it is. What are you supposed to eat? Fewer high-fat foods to help with weight loss. Oh, yeah. Let's see. choose whole grain foods, whole wheat bread, crackers, cereals, brown rice, oatmeal, and barley. Sounds like a good diet, doesn't it? Okay, mix of vegetables, no problem there. Fish, chicken, eat foods that have been boiled, maybe not. You don't want fried foods because that means that you get more fat in them. Okay? And drink water instead of juice will go along with that. And then here we are again, low fat or skim milk, yogurt, and cheese. Okay, the advice will continue for the next 20 years. There's no way we're ever going to get it off the web stream, okay, to eat a low-fat diet if you have diabetes. You want to say anything about that?
I just have a funny story that my dad told me yesterday. He doesn't have diabetes because high blood pressure and he could lose some weight. And so he went to see a new doctor, and his doctor said, well, your daughter's a dietitian, listen to her. And he goes, well, this is what my daughter usually says, eat low carb, high fat. And the doctor went pale. And the doctor's like, what? Fat makes you fat. Carbs don't make me fat. And my dad's like, she knows what she's doing. She teaches people like you. And so he said, you know, oh, back in the day when I went to school for those 2 weeks or whatever, that semester, one course that you had to take on nutrition, this is what they were teaching. And a lot of people still advocate for this when obviously the science isn't supporting that. It's just this dogma that just keeps being repeated. And unfortunately, this is aggravating the problem we're trying to fix.
Right, exactly. And the American Dietetic Association in 2008 said that it's okay to have a low-carb, high-fat diet, but it's very difficult to find that on their website. They don't make a big point of it. And I'll say this on camera, there's some suspicion on my part that the reason some organizations like the American Diabetes Association continue to say have 150 grams of carbohydrates a day, well, if you ate the way I'm teaching you to eat, you might not need their services, okay? So you got to think about, you know, what's going on here, okay? So, effective, wrong. Over 30 studies have shown that to be untrue. Eating whole, it doesn't matter whether you eat whole grain or any kind of grain. The whole grain is just a little slower. It's still carbs. That's wrong, and consuming low-fat products of any kind are wrong. So what you need to do is to lower the demand for insulin by lowering your carbohydrates, engaging in fasting, and we'll talk about that for a minute, or having your stomach reduced through surgery. Now, in extreme cases, you know, that may be the best option. I'm not saying no one should ever have bariatric surgery, but no one should have bariatric surgery without first giving a low-carb diet a good try, and I'm saying a good try for like 2 years, okay, to see what it can do. As I said before, bariatric surgery just restricts the amount of food you can eat, so therefore your carbs go down. Unfortunately, up to 92% have a reduction in diabetes-related mortality, but over 40% of people who've had bariatric surgery may develop diabetes again within 5 years. So how would you like that? You go through the surgery and then find out you're back again to being diabetic. Not a good plan, okay?
I have quite a few patients who have come back to me post-gastric bypass 2, 3, 4 years back after, you know, they're like, I don't have diabetes, and now I do again, you know, and so then we go back. Really, the one thing I'll say about the diet that you have to eat after gastric bypass is basically a low-carb diet, not just because of the restriction of food, but having enough protein is so key, and you're not getting a huge volume. You have to focus on that protein. They really reduce carbohydrates because carbohydrates are really just fillers. And if you were to eat a lot of sugar at one time, it causes something called dumping syndrome, which really just, the food just goes straight through you, and you end up with diarrhea. So that really greatly reduces the amount of sugar that you eat, because otherwise you're going to feel sick. So it really forces you to have a low-carb diet. But if you don't stick to that diet and you go back to eating the way you were eating before, you can stretch your stomach, and you can eat plenty of carbs still, especially if you graze throughout the day, which can cause your problems again. So I do, as Dave says, I recommend doing a low-carb, high-fat diet first, because that's essentially what you're going to be forced to do with on a gastric bypass diet. But if you do decide to do gastric bypass, Southcoast is really good.
Just want to get that in.
I agree with you for that. I've actually had gastric bypass myself. I got down to very low weight, and I've regained about 70 pounds. So if you don't watch what you eat, you can regain your weight. I didn't have that. Thank goodness I haven't had the diabetic thing, but it is in my family. But you can have a regain. They say you don't really stretch out your pouch. They say that you just have to activate it. And if you eat the wrong things, you put the sugars back in your body and the stuff that you're not supposed to eat. Unfortunately, I don't really, I've never really had a problem eating anything after gastric bypass, like even like the dumping syndrome that you have. I know 1,000 million people that have had it, gastric bypass done, and have very much problems with dumping syndrome and eating even milk for that sake. Some people become lactose intolerant from it. But you
Do
have
you
to
have any
watch.
difficulty with fats?
Nope. Well, it depends. Like if you're eating chicken and steak, you have to cut it up smaller
Yeah.
because it does feel like it gets stuck, like
Right.
right here.
Yeah.
But that's.
But as
about-
far as digesting fats,
Digesting,
you're just as
yeah.
capable. Right.
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 I think the reason why they put people on a low-fat, low-carb diet and mostly high protein is because they're worried about the amount of calories, but fat should not be restricted if you want to, if you have fat surgery, really.
Right. No, they never really said like to do, like they never suggested to do, well, you have to do everything low fat now. It's just you have to watch your sugar intake. You're not supposed to have more than 10 grams of sugar at a serving. Just for them, like you said. I was just.
So the bottom line is you can have bariatric surgery, but you're going to end up, if you're going to be successful, go on a low-fat,
Yeah, pretty much.
low-carb, high-fat diet.
I'm supposed to have
Right.
70
When
to
you're
80
done.
grams of protein a day.
Yep.
So, and it's not easy.
So essentially, lifestyle changes work faster, better, and cheaper than medication and are as effective or more effective than gastric bypass without any side effects or long-term complications. Diet change can reverse most of the features of diabetes within 1 week. Okay, so it's what you eat that matters. We mentioned insulin resistance. It's simply that the cells in your body become intolerant of insulin. And the way you reverse that essentially is by cutting back on things that stimulate the insulin in the first place. There's a whole chart here. I won't go through it, but basically the idea is to keep your sugar out of your bloodstream as much as possible. Okay. There's a couple of cartoons about fasting. Now, everyone in this room has fasted in the last 24 hours, right? Unless you stayed up all night eating. Anybody do that? Occasionally people do. But if you slept, you were fasting. That is to say, you had a period of, I don't know, 6, 8 hours when you were not eating. Okay, that's a good thing. Your body likes that. Okay, it not only helps the sleep restores your brain, but also it backs off of the demand for insulin. Okay, so having that rest period is helpful to your body. Unfortunately, when you get to my age, at 68, that overnight rest period may not be enough of a rest period. So you need to give your body more rest, okay? And that's all we mean by fasting, is just not putting demand for insulin on your body, okay? A simple way to fast is skip breakfast, okay? How many people have been told you have to eat every 3 hours? You ever hear that? Okay. I don't know where that comes from.
Well, carbs burn up really quick.
Thank you. Right. So if you're really not concerned about carbohydrates and you're not eating them and they're not making you hungry all the time, then has anybody found that when you're on a high-fat diet that you don't get hungry as often? Yeah, that's the beauty of it, okay? And you end up being able to go for quite lengthy periods of time without eating. Typically, Katie said you get up and have a nice, some eggs and bacon or sausage or something of that sort of good high-fat breakfast. And it'll be in the middle of the afternoon and you're going, gee, I never ate lunch, I never got hungry. And the kind of hunger you get is not that famished kind of hunger where you just have to eat. It's the kind of hunger that comes on slowly, gives you lots of options, and okay, I'll eat, and okay, I've eaten. It's just not the same. Okay, but that every 3-hour business comes from eating carbohydrates.
So I'm going to pass this around because it's not very big, but I drew a little graph to show you how your blood sugar is affected by the different nutrients. So carbs, like I said, burn up really quickly. So they digest into sugar very quickly, they spike your blood sugar, and then they go back down within a couple of hours. About 4 hours, they're completely out of your system, your blood sugar is back to normal. Or if your body overproduces insulin, you actually might drop low after a meal because you're overproducing insulin and your body's putting away too much of that blood sugar. Protein is the peak. It only digests half into blood sugar, so your blood sugar doesn't go up as high, but it does go up some. So if you're having a big steak or something like that, some of that will affect your blood sugar, and it takes longer to digest, maybe 6 hours to digest over time. Fat is the lowest curve there. That one affects your blood sugar maybe 10%, and it could take 10 or 12 hours to digest that fat, and that's why when you eat a lot of fat in your diet, you're not hungry for a long period of time. So if you're doing a low-carb, high-fat diet, the carbs digest very quickly, and you don't have the fat in order to keep it, sustained energy or anything. So you're going to have this up and down thing. And so, especially if you have diabetes and your blood sugars go really high, you're going to feel crappy up there, you're going to feel crappy when you crash. And then you eat again, you feel crappy again. It's a vicious cycle. But even without diabetes, you can have that sugar crash where you're like, feed me now or somebody's going to die, right? That's that crash afterwards. When you reduce the amount of carbohydrates, your blood sugars don't go as high. And when you add fat, it has more of that elongated digestion and more sustained energy. And that's where you may have hunger symptoms, which are kind of like, I think I should eat soon. I think I'm getting kind of tired. It's not like this urgent, I have to eat, because it's more a gradual impact on your blood sugars. The one last problem that the American diet has as a whole is we're doing high carb and high fat. So your blood sugar is getting sent high, and the fat is really skyrocketing it for a while. And so that's, I think, where the Diabetes Association is saying, well, we can't have fat with our carbs because then you'll have high blood sugars forever, But if you bring down your carbs, it's okay to have plenty of fat.
It's fat in the absence of carbs that we're talking about. As much as possible to reduce those. And what you're talking about is satiety, the ability to feel full after eating. So this first cartoon says fasting doesn't mean eating fast food, just so you're clear about that. And then let's ease into this. The doctor says, I want you to try fasting between meals. Kidding. Okay. The whole point about fasting is just going for longer periods of time without eating. Okay. And it's as simple as skipping breakfast or skipping lunch. Some people fast from supper to supper. Okay, fine. And some people will go 2 or 3 days or 2 or 3 weeks fasting. Okay, you do need to have water. You're shaking your head. You can have things like bone broth or things of that sort to provide you. You need to stay hydrated. And salt is important as well, so that's things like broth are helpful when you're doing that. Most of us say, no way I'm ever going to fast because we've had that high carb experience of I'm going to kill somebody if I don't have something to eat. But if you're on a high fat diet, first of all, You're not going to experience that kind of a symptom. You don't get gnawingly hungry. And guess what? Your body will adapt. Okay? You won't believe it until you do it. But after about 48 hours, you don't get hungry anymore. Okay? It's strange because our bodies were made to survive famines. Okay? Hunger is good when it motivates us to go out and hunt and get our food, right? Okay? But it's not good for us if it debilitates us and we're unable to function. So our bodies are made in such a way that when we cannot get food for a period of 48 hours, our body goes to sleep, basically, in terms of its hunger. And allows you to do the things you need to do to take care of yourself, defend yourself from wild animals and maybe travel long distances that you're going to need to do to get to a source of food, okay? But you're not starving, okay? And if you listen to the experiences of people who've done fasting, they'll all tell you that after about into the second day, the hunger just stops. And then when you resume eating, you think, well, you're going to be ravenous. Well, no, it doesn't work that way. You eat a normal meal and you're fine, okay? And you can continue that way. Obviously, if you're fasting for periods of time, it's not only not stimulating your blood sugar, but your caloric intake is going down. So what's likely to happen with your weight? It goes down. You want to lose a couple pounds? Fast a couple days. Okay? You had experience with that?
Yes, I did. Generally speaking, doctor, why does it seem easier for us males to lose weight
Yes.
than
We have higher muscle mass. That's the bottom line. Yeah, men lose weight easier than women. Okay. And it's unfortunate. That's why we used to give the highest percentage weight loss prize, and it was always a guy year after year. And the women would say, hey, wait a minute. Well, now we do men and women because there is a difference in that regard. But when you think about it, we don't like to think of ourselves as animals, do we? We're above that. But guess what? We are. And if you're going to ensure the survival of the species, between men and women, who has to live longer? Women. Why? You give birth, absolutely. A guy only has to live for a minute or two, at most. But women are stuck for the rest of their lives, or at least the next 20 years, until their children can raise children. Okay, so if you think about the survival of the species you want to basically store fat the best, and it's women. And women rue the day that, but if you're wondering why all that fat's there, that's for survival, okay? Doesn't help in the fashion world, but it certainly helps in the survival world, okay? And so it's easier to put it on and harder to take it off, okay? And it's there for good reason, all right? You need it.
Yeah, but they still say it's not fair.
What's that? No fair, right, yeah. Well, that's cultural and all that kind of stuff. And you can blame men for that, I guess. Okay. Yep.
When I started eating low-carb, high-fat, I didn't incorporate fasting. I hadn't even really realized about fasting just yet. But I did realize that I was not hungry as often, and I actually had to mourn eating. Eating had become like a pastime, and so you had to find something else to do, because you don't need that snack. The other thought I had is that sometimes fasting can be kind of a daunting concept. Oh my God, I'm going to go 24 to 48 hours without eating. Test it. Just wait until you're actually hungry. See how long you can go. If you're going to eat dinner and then you sleep through most of it and then you're not hungry for breakfast, wait until you're actually hungry. You might actually go. There was one day I went until like 1 o'clock in the afternoon. It's like, oh, okay, now I'm hungry. Be ready with food. Have something there, the right food, so you're not going for a Snickers or something like that. Have the right food available for when you actually do get hungry. But check in with yourself. Am I hungry? No. Okay. And just, that can ease you into fasting.
Which kind of gets to the rule of when you should eat. When you're hungry. Okay? We're all into the post-industrial world view of you eat according to the clock, right? It's 12 o'clock, must be time for lunch. Anybody ever get there, particularly when you're eating fat, and you go, I'm not hungry. So why do we eat? Well, we eat because that's when the whistle blows at the factory, all right? If you're not at a factory, don't eat, okay? If you have the flexibility to eat whenever, and I find it's kind of interesting in the work world, oftentimes people don't eat until 1 or 2 o'clock in the afternoon. And, you know, so if you can adjust when you eat. Follow your body, not the clock, okay? Eat when you're hungry. You know, you'll do much better in the long run.
We're trained to eat by the clock since we're little. I
Yeah.
mean, look at the kids are in school. My kid
Right.
eats lunch at 10:30 in the morning. I'm like, you just ate breakfast at 7:30. Are you really hungry? But what do they feed him at school? They feed him cereal. So of
Well,
course he's hungry.
Right, you're guaranteed if you feed children cereal, they will be hungry by
Right.
10 o'clock. And now we've institutionalized that with snacks in school, and morning and afternoon. So we're feeding kids, why? Because of what we're feeding them, that's what's going on. We take away whole milk, which would keep them full until lunchtime, fine. But no, we give them skim milk, and as I said, skim milk and corn, if you want to fatten a pig, that's what you use, okay?
Dr. Weed, how about eating very fast rather than
Well,
slow?
you should slow your eating down and enjoy it, absolutely, right, yeah.
Is that
But the
is that
wolfing
fact?
food down, I think, comes a lot from the carb, the low blood sugar kind of, I gotta get it through my system fast, you know. But when you're eating high-fat foods, absolutely. Eat like the French, take 2 hours to have dinner, come on. They don't eat a lot of food, it's high in fat, they enjoy it, absolutely. Okay. Speaking of the clock, we're just about out of time here. I just want a couple more slides here. If you want to read more about fasting, go on dietdoctor.com. How many people have gone on dietdoctor.com? You all got to get on there, okay? It is the #1 website. Explore it. It'll tell you all about how to do diabetes. He has a nice 2-week low-carb starter diet. Thousands of recipes, gorgeous pictures. It's just a wonderful website. Movies, you name it. I mean, you can spend days on it, okay? And it's the center of the low-carb world, all right? But on that, you'll see a lot about Jason Fung. He's an endocrinologist in Toronto, and he treats people with diabetes, severe diabetes. People who've been, you know, A1Cs of 10 or more for years, gets them off medication. Okay, I don't want to keep you past the 11 o'clock time. Thank you very much, Katie. Thank you all.
Yeah.
We'll be back again next week.
Not too much.